News at 5.
You are looking at live pictures from Sky 4. This is above the port of Oakland. This is where Occupy protesters, and you can see there's a big crowd of them, have spent the day trying to shut down the port. This has been in the works since the last protest at the port, which was about a month ago, and it is part of a nationwide event happening today. We'll have more on the other protests in a moment. This was the scene this morning, though, when protesters blocked some entrances to the port of Oakland. You can see police there moving in. A lot of trucks were backed up for hours. Some gates were affected. Despite all of this, though, port officials say that operations were never fully shut down. We've got team coverage now, including reaction from Oakland city leaders. KRON 4's J.R. Stone has been watching all of this today and joins us live from Oakland with our top story. J.R.?
Well, Catherine, we know earlier this afternoon of 2 arrests, but other than that, no arrests, just those 2. So it has been a rather peaceful afternoon. Now, you might be asking, what are you standing in front of? Well, I was standing in front of dozens of police officers, but they have left within the last 10 minutes. This was being used as a staging area because the police presence in this area is very heavy. We're seeing a lot of officers in riot gear who are patrolling this port area right now, and we do know that there is an impact here. The shippers that usually show up, and that's usually between 100 and 200 in the nighttime hours, have not been asked to come to that 7 o'clock shift that they usually would show up on. Now, I do want to go to some of the video that I shot earlier this afternoon because these are some of the protesters that are right now marching to the Port of Oakland, and you can see they were met. This was from the 14th and Broadway area, but there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 500, 600, 700 people. So we're talking about a lot of people, not as busy as it was last month when they marched to the port, but still, there are a lot of people out. Now, we've had team coverage on this, as Catherine talked about earlier. KRON 4's Hazik Medhune was out and spoke with the mayor. This is what she had to say.
This morning's demonstrations were peaceful. We want to thank the police, the port employees, the demonstrators for keeping it that way. We will continue to work hard for the afternoon and evening to keep port operations and downtown businesses going with the minimum disruption. We urge demonstrators to continue to respect the rights of the 99% who are working out at the port and downtown, and urge them to keep their protests peaceful.
Now, the mayor's been very busy today, but protesters have also been very vocal, along with port authorities. We talked with them as well. This is what they had to say.
We've shut down the Port of Oakland for the daytime shift.
Protesters caused sporadic disruptions throughout the port area, which led to delays. But the port has remained operational throughout the morning.
The truckers are still here, but there's nobody to unload their stuff.
We are working with our partners, labor, community, business, truckers, dock workers, and our government and law enforcement partners to keep the port operational.
They have called off the shift officially. Longshoremen are going home. Those that have checked in to the Union Hall go home with pay. The clerks had already gone home. The security had already gone home. There's no shift. We've shut down the Port of Oakland.
We stress again, it is important to keep the port open so that workers can make a living.
Any movement that attacks the boss's profit is gonna be inconvenient for a few people, but in the long run, it's gonna make our lives better.
Now, you don't see protesters behind me right now, but officers are out here and protesters are in the process of marching to this area. I have my camera ready to go, and when they get here, I'll take you to the middle of the action. If we get updates, we will bring them to you here on KRON 4 News. Reporting live in Oakland, J.R. Stone, KRON 4 News.
Thanks, JR. And let's take another live look at the protesters have regrouped, so they are heading back toward the port, as JR told you, and as you saw in our earlier reports, there were a lot of people out there, and they are again regrouping, heading toward the Port of Oakland for basically another attempt at shutting the port down. In Los Angeles, trucks heading to the Port of Long Beach could not get in today. About 200 Occupy protesters were part of the effort along the West Coast to shut down ports. shipments. The police forced the demonstrators out of the port parking lot when several dozen regrouped, blocking a major road. After 4 hours, the protest finally broke up. That was during some heavy rain. In San Diego, about 80 protesters at the port there. Police were able to keep them outside the port gates. This group came with signs. 4 people who sat down in the middle of the road and refused to move, they were arrested. And in Portland, Oregon, a couple hundred protesters blocking entrances to 2 terminals at the port. Workers were told to stay home for their safety. A port spokesman said, unfortunately for those workers, they would be losing their wages for the day since they could not work. Before the protest even began, police did arrest 3 people carrying weapons. And in Houston, Texas, some demonstrators arrested when they tried to shut down the port here. They had signs showing solidarity with the rest of the Occupy movements across the West Coast. And let's take one more look at a live look at the protesters marching back toward the port. And again, remember, they were out there in larger numbers earlier today. Port officials say they never succeeded in fully shutting down the port of Oakland. Protesters would argue that, saying that they effectively did, that really there wasn't much that truckers could do. There was no one to unload their shipments. But what you're looking at live is the march by protesters toward the port of Oakland after regrouping. Stay with KRON 4 for continuing coverage of the Occupy protest at the port. We'll have updates throughout the night, and our coverage continues online on our website, KRON4.com, and our Facebook and Twitter pages.